The safest place in America was never the post office. It was a locked train car packed with armed clerks and 50-pound mailbags racing through the night at 90 miles per hour. The only way to deliver the nation's most urgent letters was a violent gamble with a steel hook, snatching pouches from tiny towns without ever stopping. Miss the grab and the whole community waited days. Stand a step too close and the incoming bag could take your head off. Why did the federal government turn mail delivery into the most dangerous job on rails? And what was so vital in those pouches that men risked everything to keep the world moving? The crazy answer and its legacy begin with a crisis no one saw coming. A letter could leave New York with the sunrise and still be gathering dust in a Chicago sorting room 2 nights later. In the 1860s, the journey west was measured in fits and starts. Trains moved fast, but the mail did not. Every time a sack of letters reached a city like Pittsburgh, it stopped cold. It felt like time stood still for a letter. There, it might sit for 72 hours, waiting for a clerk to sort it by hand. Chicago was not much better, with 48 hours lost in piles of undelivered envelopes, all because the next train could not leave until every letter was sorted and assigned. The numbers told the story. A coast-to-coast letter could spend more time waiting in a depot than riding the rails. Delays stacked up across the country, from the biggest cities to the smallest towns. By the time a letter finally reached its destination, news was old, business deals had cooled, and families were left hanging. The system was broken under its own weight. The population was booming, the demand for speed was rising, but the post office was stuck in a world where time meant nothing to a letter idling on a wooden bench. Across the country, frustration grew. People needed a way to move information as fast as the trains themselves. Something had to give, because America's future was being held up by the mail. George B. Armstrong saw the bottleneck firsthand. As a Chicago post office supervisor during the Civil War, he watched mail pile up by the wagon load, knowing every lost hour meant another family waiting for news, another business left in limbo. Armstrong had a simple, radical idea: sort the mail while it moved. In July 1862, he loaded a handful of clerks, stacks of unsorted letters, and a few makeshift racks into a baggage car on the Chicago and Northwestern line bound for Clinton, Iowa. As the wheels hammered west, Armstrong's men began working through the mountain of mail, slotting letters for towns they would never see, racing the train's own shadow across the prairie. By the time they reached Clinton, the mail was already sorted, ready to be handed off, no delay, no wasted days. It was a proof of concept that changed everything. Armstrong wrote to his superiors, arguing that every minute the mail spent standing still was a minute America could not afford to lose. On August 28, 1864, the railway mail service became official policy. Armstrong's rolling office was now the backbone of the nation's information network. The experiment had become the standard. Across the rails, clerks were ordered to sort in motion, turning every mile of track into a moving artery of news, money, and hope. The age of the stationary mailroom was over. The country was about to find out just how fast it could move. Step inside a railway post office car and you are in a world built for one thing: relentless motion. 60 feet from end to end, no windows to tempt a thief or let in a stray bullet, just rows of sorting racks climbing the walls, dozens of wooden pigeonholes waiting to swallow letters for every town between Boston and Omaha. The main aisle runs straight down the middle, barely wide enough for 2 clerks to pass without bumping shoulders. Every surface is built to take a beating, steel plates on the floor, heavy doors that slam shut with a jolt. Everything bolted down to survive the wild ride. At one end sits the heart of the operation, the catch. Here, mounted across the frame, is the catcher arm, a steel bar about 7 feet long and 2 inches thick, designed to pivot out into the racing wind. Most of the time it hangs low, out of the way, but when the train nears a mail crane, The clerk grabs the handle and locks it into place, forming a horizontal arm ready to snatch a pouch out of thin air. The arm's job is simple: absorb the shock when a 50-pound canvas bag, packed tight with letters, slams into it at highway speed. The force is enough to snap a lesser piece of metal clean in half, so every inch of the arm is overbuilt for survival. Outside, the mail crane waits, a tall post with a wooden or steel arm jutting over the track, holding the pouch in a tight hourglass shape. The bag hangs at just the right height, the loop cinched in the middle, so the hook can snag it in a split second. Every exchange is a geometry problem solved at 60 miles an hour. The car, the arm, the crane, the bag, all lining up for a collision that lasts less than a heartbeat. Inside, the clerks barely have room to duck as the bag comes flying in, slamming onto the steel plates with a sound that echoes through the car. There is no margin for error, just the narrow space between the racks and the open door, the hook and the next bridge piling, the bag, and the clerk's head. In this rolling office, every inch is measured in risk and reward. The force packed into a single mail exchange could rattle your bones. At 60 miles an hour, a 50-pound pouch does not just swing into the car, it hits with more than 8,000 joules of energy. That is the same punch you would get from dropping that bag off a 12-story building. Now push the throttle to 90 miles per hour and the numbers climb to over 18,000 joules. That is pure kinetic violence, unleashed in a split second inside a steel box rolling through the night. Railway post office clerks did not just work around this danger, they lived by it. Every catch was a gamble where the laws of physics wrote the odds. The steel catcher arm had to be strong enough to survive impact after impact, run after run, year after year. If the arm failed, the bag could tear straight through the car, or worse, take out a man standing too close. There was no room for hesitation. The moment the train lined up with the crane, everything had to be perfect: the speed, the angle, the timing of the arm. Miss by a second, and the mail for an entire town vanished into the weeds. Raise the arm too soon, and a telegraph pole could shear it off like a twig. Too late, and the bag sailed by untouched, leaving nothing but the echo of a missed chance. Mail was not just cargo, it was the nation's heartbeat. Fast mail trains like the 20th Century Limited ruled the rails, racing through the night with right-of-way over everything else. Even the most luxurious passenger trains pulled aside when the mail came through. For the post office, speed was king. The clerks inside those cars were not just moving envelopes, they were trusted with gold, cash, and secrets, all riding on a collision that lasted less than a second. Out on the main line, the mail did not wait for anyone. Night runs on the railway post office demanded more than sharp eyes. They demanded a sixth sense. When the world outside vanished into darkness or fog, the only thing guiding the clerks was sound. No headlights could pierce the black beyond the open door. The clerk stood ready, boots braced on steel, wind roaring in his ears, cinders stinging his face. He listened, counting the rhythm of the wheels as they hammered over the rail joints, each click bringing the train closer to the invisible crane. Some routes had a bridge just before the catch. The echo would bounce off the stone, a split-second warning. Others relied on the pitch of the whistle, a code for the town up ahead. There was no room for second-guessing. The clerk's hand gripped the catcher arm, sweat slick on steel, heart pounding in time with the rails. He could not see the mail crane, but he knew 3 clicks after the crossing, or when the whistle dropped to a low moan, it was time. He kicked the outgoing pouch into the night, snapped the arm into place, and waited for the impact. In the dark, the incoming bag was just a shadow, but the moment of contact was unmistakable. A sudden, violent thwack as 50 pounds of mail slammed into the arm, the whole car shuddering from the force. The bag skidded across the floor, scattering grit and dust. In that instant, missing by a heartbeat meant an empty town or a broken neck. Oral histories speak of clerks who could run a blind catch without ever looking. veterans, who mapped each mile in their mind, who could judge distance by the way the wind shifted or the sound of the rails changed under their feet. Every sense was tuned to the job, every nerve stretched tight. The stakes were not just letters, they were lives, livelihoods, the heartbeat of a nation moving at 90 miles per hour, all riding on a moment you could not see, only feel. To wear the badge of a railway post office clerk, you needed more than steady nerves and quick feet. You needed a mind like a steel trap. Every candidate faced the infamous case test, a trial that chewed up the unprepared and spat them out without mercy. The rules were simple, but the standard was brutal. Sort 600 letters an hour into hundreds of slots, each marked for a different town, junction, or whistle stop. Miss more than 2 out of every 100, and you failed. 97% accuracy was the bare minimum. 99% was expected. There were no second chances. The test was not just about speed, it was about total recall. Clerks memorized the names and locations of up to 10,000 towns, the order of every train, and the branching spiderweb of routes that crisscrossed the country. The schemes changed with the seasons, and so did the tests. If you could not keep up, you washed out. But mental muscle was not enough. The government trusted these men with more than postcards and bills. Inside every railway post office car rode a small fortune, registered mail packed with gold, cash, and diamonds. After World War I, robberies spiked. The answer came in cold blue steel. Every clerk was issued a .38 special revolver, loaded and ready. It was standard policy, written in the manuals and enforced with inspections. The revolver rode on the clerk's belt, right next to the mail keys. Some never had to draw. Others faced down thieves in the dark, knowing the next stop was hours away and help would not come in time. The badge, the revolver, and the case test formed a trinity: intellect, duty, and the threat of violence, all riding together in a car that never stopped moving. To pass the test and carry the gun was to join a brotherhood, one that demanded perfection and punished mistakes without hesitation. Railway post office clerks rode just behind the locomotive, packed into a car that doubled as a moving target and a lightning rod for disaster. In a wreck, the RPO car was the first to crumple. Wedged between the engine tender and the rest of the train, wooden walls splintering like matchsticks under tons of steel. Official reports from the Interstate Commerce Commission read like casualty lists. Twisted metal, shattered racks, and somewhere in the wreckage, clerks crawling through debris to rescue the mail before tending to their own wounds. They knew the drill. Registered pouches, stuffed with payrolls, bonds, and gold, had to be pulled from the flames or the flood, no matter what it cost. Sometimes the only thing left standing was the mail crane, the pouch still dangling, while the car behind it was gone. The risk was not just the crash. Robbery was a constant threat. After World War I, armed gangs targeted fast mail trains, hoping to snatch fortunes in cash and jewelry. Clerks kept their .38 special revolvers close, ready to defend the mail with their lives. Some nights, shots rang out in the dark, bullets punching through the thin car walls. The job demanded nerves of steel and a sense of duty that ran deeper than fear. Salvage crews formed a brotherhood, men who time after time chose the mail over their own safety. For every letter that made it, there was a story of blood, smoke, and grit. In the end, the deadliest car on the rails was not just a workplace. It was a test of who you were when everything else fell apart. The end didn't come with a crash or a bang. It came with a memo and a timetable. By the 1950s, the interstate highway system was carving new lines across the country, and the highway post office rolled out its first mail trucks. These bright buses could reach places the rails never touched, and they didn't need a crew of iron-nerved clerks to make a flying catch. Trucks were cheaper, easier to reroute, and didn't shudder every time a bag slammed into steel. Then came the jets. The Boeing 707 cut coast-to-coast delivery from days to hours. Airmail zipped over mountains and rivers in a single night, making even the fastest train look slow. By the early 1970s, the number of trains carrying mail hooks dropped to a handful. The cranes that once dotted every small town siding stood rusting in the weeds, their hourglass arms empty. On June 30th, 1977, the last railway post office run left New York, bound for Washington, D.C. The clerks on board sorted their final letters, locked up their revolvers, and closed the catch door for good. The Brotherhood of the Hook faded into memory as the last steel arm came down. For over a century, the railway post office was the pulse of American communication, but in the end, even the fastest hands couldn't outrun the future. The hook was gone, but the stories of speed, grit, and pride still ride the rails. Today, data flies across continents in milliseconds, but the obsession with speed persists, just in digital form. The legacy of those clerks lives on in every overnight promise and every package tracked in real time. Progress still demands risk, precision, and trust. The next revolution. In connection won't slow down, and neither will our hunger to close the distance. Leave your thoughts below if this story moved you.